Good morning. I declare this meeting of the Kempsey Shire Council open. It's the 26th of April 2022 and welcome everyone. I remind all people in attending this meeting that it is being webcast on YouTube with audio and vision. A recording of the meeting is available on the internet and is required to be available for 12 months. Private recordings of the meeting should not occur. Only members of the media are allowed to make a recording. All members of the Kempsey Shire community are entitled to attend council meetings to observe. Please refrain from interjecting or undertaking any behaviour that will stop councillors from undertaking their important task of decision making. There should be no defamatory comments made by anyone. Please ensure all devices like mobile phones are on silent mode. On behalf of Council, I welcome all people in the public gallery and observing live on the internet to our meeting today. Councillors in attendance: Councillor Kerry Riddington on my left, your right, Councillor Alex Wyatt, Councillor Arthur Bain and Councillor Liz Campbell. On my right, your left, Councillor Simon Ferguson, Councillor Anthony Patterson and Councillor Vijay Craigie. Council staff in attendance on my right is the General Manager, Mr Craig Milburn. On my left, your right, we've got the Director, Robert Fish, Operations and Planning, and Steve Mitchell, Director, Corporate and Commercial. On my right, your left, we've got Ms Peterson, who's the Coordinator of Governance and Admin, and Mr Thorogood, Manager of Governance and Admin. Also welcome Councillor Josh Freeman, who's on my right, your left. We will commence with the opening prayer. Dear Lord, help us in our deliberations today so that our decisions will be for the greater good of the whole of Kempsey Shire. Amen. Acknowledgement of country. Kempsey Shire Council acknowledges the land of the Dunghutti Nation. We pay respect to elders past and present. We acknowledge the role of emerging leaders to continue to guide us in the future. We also acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who reside in our community from other areas of Australia. We'll move on to item 3, apologies. And as all councillors are in attendance, there's nil. Unless someone leaves later, we'll have an apology then. We now move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting in March, 15th of March. And I call on someone who was at that meeting to move that they be accepted. Councillor Bain moves. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Ferguson, thank you. Any debate? Questions? I'll put the motion. Anyone dissenting from that motion being accepted? Declare it carried. We now move to item 5, which disclosures of interest. Do any councillors have an interest they wish to disclose to the meeting?
Mr Mayor, I need to declare a significant pecuniary conflict of interest in item 11.2 as it deals in my employment, and I'll be leaving the room for that item.
Thank you, Mr General Manager. Item 8, reports of committees.
Sorry. I want a question about that.
Yes,
Given
Councillor Wyatt, please.
Given that we are discussing that rate variation, as ratepayers, do we or not all have a conflict of interest?
That's a good question.
And if so, I have a conflict of interest as ratepayers.
Mr General Manager will answer that quite clearly.
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, it's a matter that affects all the residents and that, so there's no conflict of interest.
Thank you, Mr General Manager. Thank you for the question, Councillor Wyatt. Anyone else have a question about conflicts? No, moving on. Thank you. No reports of committees. Item 7 is a mayoral minutes. 6, I should say. Items passed by exception. I've flicked the wrong page. I apologise. There are items there all listed that are up for acceptance as adopted. It's up to each councillor, without having to give a reason, if they wish to withdraw any item. I've been advised by the General Manager that we should be withdrawing 9.8.
9.8 and 11.1.
Right. Thank you. We need to discuss both those items, and so that'll be in council deliberations later. One of them is in confidential, of course, the legal matters. So are there any other items on that list that need to be withdrawn because you would like to speak on, or wish to oppose? If not, I'll then ask for any questions on any of those items that are part of the items passed by exception. No questions. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to ask a question about 9.6.
9.6, the write-off of outstanding debts.
Could I do that now?
Yes, please. That's what we're asking for questions now, please.
Is there anything we can do in the future to prevent this? Like, why did this scenario occur, and why was it kind of not resolved earlier?
Mr. General Manager, would you like to answer, please?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mitchell may want to add a little bit, but yeah, basically, occasionally, all businesses face suppliers who end up being bankrupt and don't pay their bills, and that's just something that council does very occasionally face, and that really was the situation in this. We did everything we could to be assured. They've ended up in court, they've ended up being liquidated, and there are no dividends being paid. So yeah, we do have to write this debt off. And if Mr. Mitchell's got anything else you want to add?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess I'll just add to that. We do have an annual process where we do review our outstanding debtors as part of our preparation of our annual financial statements. And it's something that the auditors obviously are keen to understand, that any debts that we do have on our books are recoverable. So there is a process in place. And we're obviously always continuing to tighten that process as we go. As the General Manager indicated, in this particular situation, there was nothing that we could do, and it's gone through a full liquidation process and there's no dividend, so it was unavoidable.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Director. Oh, thank you. And another question back. Councillor Campbell, please.
No question. I just like to move the recommendation.
Okay, well, I haven't. Yeah, thank you. I hadn't called for that. I'm going to go on to another point about it. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Campbell. We have a mover that the items passed by exception be accepted by Councillor Campbell. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Freeman. I put the motion. All those that assent? There shouldn't be any. Thank you. I declare it carried. We move on to item 7, which is a mayoral minute. The agenda says there's nil. There's actually a mayoral minute in confidential. So in my understanding of the Code of Meeting Practice, this should have a precedence, but it has been moved in the agenda to item 11.2. Normally you would have a procedural motion that a confidential item like that be moved into the confidential section, or if you just wanted to run the meeting as it plays out in the agenda, you would close the meeting for that confidential item and then open up again. But it's best in confidential, and that's where it is going to be, but there is a mayoral minute. Item 8, the reports of committees. We now come to item 9.1, the Community Strategic Plan. And it's a very extensive community strategic plan, and it's been through a whole lot of community input, and we have a lot of information there. The recommendation is before you. It has 3 points. council does. So would a councillor like to move that, please? Councillor Riddington moves it. Do we have a seconder, please? Sorry? Yeah, oh, thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Riddington, would you like to speak to it, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I personally would like to say how much I think the community appreciates the council work on this. This has been a mammoth effort, and I think it will be a really good vision for our community into the future. So I would like to thank them very much.
Thank you, Councillor Riddington. Do we have anyone else who wish to speak on this item? Councillor Wyatt, please.
I do. I've got a few points and a couple of questions, if I may. Do you want me to ask the questions first or the points? Does it matter?
Yes, sir, please. Yes,
Okay.
you've got the floor.
Okay. My points are, and I just want this on public record, is that a community expectation and my own expectation as a new councillor is that we would have a significant role in the development of this community strategic plan through the engagement process, reviewing the document, advocating for community groups and collaborating with our community networks. And this wasn't the case, that most of this plan was developed through the previous council. I feel that current councillors, and particularly myself, haven't had as much opportunity to engage in this process as I feel there was an expectation in the community and myself. And the only way that we could have done this was to be doing it prior to being elected and participating in the engagement process that was offered. So I am a little disappointed that I wasn't able to contribute in a capacity that I would have liked. I was kind of waiting for some workshops, and now I realise that it had already been done, 80% done by the time we were endorsed with councillors. And I feel that I'm being asked to endorse something on behalf of the community that I have had no insight or input as an elected representative of the community. And I want the community to be aware that in my situation or ours, that is the case. I completely understand that there is a legislative process in which we must comply. I just wanted to put that on the public record, that the integrated planning process is a legislative framework that we must comply, and therefore it started beforehand due to COVID. So personally, I do like the plan in terms of the vision and the themes, and the formatting of the table is quite on point with that very non-bureaucratic language. I think whoever came up with that idea was very good. I particularly like, how we get there and who can help. For me, and I think you all know this is coming, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more intrinsic rights of nature and a measurement of nature, things like save our species and threatened species and weed removal. So they're my points. My two questions are, one is that in the table, the infographic, which is brilliant, can we assume that 75, well, we can't assume that 75, if 25% of people have a mortgage, we can't really assume that 75% of people rent. Is there any room last minute to add how many people in our community rent? Because I think housing is a big issue. And my second question is, when will the next review of the CSP be undertaken, and will it be undertaken within the council term, this kind of next short term between 2022 and 24, or is it after the next term, so after 2024?
Thank you for those questions. Mr. General Manager, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Acknowledge Councillor Wyatt's comments. The timing of the election this time round made it very, very unfortunate. The normal practice is the councillors are actually involved in actually developing this. The overall timing, council has to do an end of term report, which will be in just over 2 years, so it is a very, very short term, and a new CSP will be developed again. That's part of that whole normally a 4-year cycle. That will actually bring us back into sync with the usual 4-year cycle. So this is an unusual circumstance. It's quite unique. So yeah, that will bring that back in. It is very difficult to make any changes to that document now, and I'm not sure we'd actually have the absolutely accurate figures on rental as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Any further questions? Councillor Bain, thank you. And then Councillor Patterson.
Yes, I'd like to congratulate the council on the development of the vision statement from the mountains to the sea, which is included in the acknowledgement of country in Dungari language, and the use of First Nations language in the vision statement. And I'd also like to acknowledge that the summary of changes in there is really powerful, because it lets people know that there was a response to their submissions, and it's very clear that the submissions that were put to council were taken into account and have had an impact on the changes, and the engagement strategies worked very well. So I'd like to congratulate the community for participating, and the council staff for the work that they've put in developing it, and the council, and thank you, commend it to my fellow councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. Councillor Patterson, please.
I'd just like to, like Councillor Alexandra said, getting on public notice about the amount of roads that the council actually maintains in the report. 671 kilometres of sealed roads and 587 kilometres of unsealed roads. I just want to make note that for the public that that they probably don't realise that we nearly have as much dirt, gravel roads as we do sealed roads. And with the amount of weather conditions that we've endured over the last number of years, that I'd like to acknowledge that Campsie Shire Council, the staff and the organisation, I'd like to acknowledge that the outstanding job that they have done, and also the large amount of work that they have in front of them to maintain this, to get our roads back to the state, at least where they were before the weather conditions turned on us before Christmas. So I'd just like to acknowledge that and put that on record, that the amount of roads that we maintain through ratepayers' money, where I believe personally we should be good if we had a little bit more help from both state and federal governments on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I endorse all of what you have said. You're right on the money there. We need the money to do the job. Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any comments or questions or debate? The move-in reply can speak now, or we can go straight to the vote. Councillor Riddington doesn't need to speak. Thank you very much. I'll put the motion. Anyone who dissents, please. It is carried unanimously, and the Community Strategic Plan is now an operational document. Thank you very much, councillors. We move to 9.2. Following on, we're now coming to the Integrated Planning and Reporting document, and there's a whole host of them, and they're all in attachments. And the purpose of this recommendation is to put these documents on public exhibition for 28 days, and they will then come back to council for final endorsement, possibly in June. Thank you very much. It'll be June. Thank you. So I am asking for a mover of that. Councillor Patterson, thank you. Seconder. Councillor Freeman, I saw you on a hand up first. Thank you. The mover, Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to that, please?
I'd like to also acknowledge that the integrated planning and reporting is a definite way forward for the future of council, and without this long-term strategic plans, without this recommendation going through, that council would struggle to operate. And just acknowledge that this is a fantastic future planning structure that helps us develop our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Anyone else wish to speak on this? Councillor Wyatt, please.
Just a confirmation question. I know that as councillors, we have had a look at some of these documents, particularly item 1 there. But largely most of these documents started to prepare within the previous term of council as well. And was there workshops conducted during that process? With councillors, I mean.
Mr. General Manager?
Yep. Basically, the work in these documents they're often actually quite ongoing. The final document does come together, but things like the long-term financial plan, for example, is something that we work on week in, week out. And there'll be different briefings and that with the council on our financial position as we go through. So it really depends on the particular documents, where they are, where they're at in the process. What we'd actually do, things like the digital strategy. No, we didn't do any workshops with the councillors on the digital strategy. It's something that is more focused on what we'll be able to provide in that actual realm. But some of them would be the strategic asset management plan. Obviously, we've workshopped with the councillors different things on our asset management, and that actually lead into all those things. So it really depends on the issues around those. A lot of them take a long time to actually develop. So the specific plans in their own right do take time. So things like the schedule of fees and charges, there's a lot of work literally by dozens and dozens of staff across the organisation where those fees and charges sit. But we have actually undertaken a number of workshops with the councillors, past and present, on the actual DP itself, the DPOP itself. It's a bit of a long-winded answer.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Councillor Campbell, please.
This is just by way of comment. As the new councillors might not be aware, these integrated planning and reporting documents come up every year, particularly the schedule of fees and the delivery program review. So every year ongoing, we're being briefed and across what is the changes. So I would say that the councillors, the older councillors that have been here in the last term, would be quite across what is here more so than the new councillors. So it's an ongoing thing.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I'd like to ask a question too. Mr. General Manager, the delivery program 2022-26 is past the date of the next council elections. Would there have to be a new delivery program at some point? Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, as I mentioned before, what will happen is that after the next election in 2024, things will fall back into that 4-year cycle. Yeah, including the DP.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Further question, Councillor Wyatt?
So you think it's fair to say then, because of the COVID situation and the complete whirlwind that we have been on in the last few months, and particularly in my own circumstances, so is it pretty fair to say that under normal situations, we were elected 4-year term, no I vote debacle, we would have a bit more aware of this?
This is a question?
We would have a bit more. This would not have sort of been come up within the first 3 months, within the third meeting of our council. We would have more situational awareness over this.
Mr. General Manager?
Through Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Normally what would happen is you're elected in September and then you're not dealing with these until around this period of time. So that's the normal cycle. So it normally works well. But this particular very unique situation has thrown you as a group of new councillors into a pretty unenviable position in lots and lots of ways.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's just important to note that the community and we all understand that too. So thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions or debate? The mover, do you have a reply? Mr. Councillor Patterson? No? Thank you.
Just one question before I go through, if that's okay.
Yes.
Just through the General Manager, this is actually a legislated part of planning for council now, isn't it?
That's correct.
All of those documents?
all bar the digital strategy is not in the legislative requirement. That's something we choose to do, and many councillors choose to do.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Right, as there's no further debate and the mover has spoken, we'll now put the motion. Is there any dissent from the recommendation on page 16 of 9.2? No dissent. I declare it carried unanimously. Continuing on with the theme of money and finances, we now come to the special rate variation. It's 9.3 on page 27, and it seeks the endorsement of council to apply to the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, IPART, for permanent special variation for the 2022-23 financial year. The recommendation is before us. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Bain. Seconder, please. Councillor Riddington. Councillor Bain, would you like to speak to it, please?
Yes, I'd like to commend this rate increase, although I recognise that it will be hard for some in our community. But we need to match what the predictions were in the long-term financial plan. We've got to also take into consideration over the next 12 months, there'll be a super increase from 9.5 to 10.5% for staff. That we'll be looking at incremental wages growth of around 3% and a CPI increase of about 4.2%. And also in the context that we have limited revenue streams, I think that that the 2% increase is absolutely essential if we need to maintain, let alone improve the services that we provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Riddington, a question or a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like it on the public record, if I may, that this is a state government issue through IPART. They have set a 0.7% increase. I have a big problem with IPART. This is a comment because IPART's calculations, if you like, or the formula that they use to calculate rate increases, to me, I don't think is viable. When we were at the conference in Sydney, the whole of the conference delegates were shocked by the 0.7 increase. So I really commend council for doing their calculations at 2%. Perhaps we should have done it, as the General Manager indicated, on Friday to 2.5. However, I commend that because I don't think we can get anything done in our community if we just go on 0.7. And I myself am really over cost shifting from the state government. I want that on public record. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Riddington. Councillor White.
100% agree with Councillor Riddington, and I have a couple of comments as well. I just want to acknowledge first that the cost of living is a huge federal government issue, and it's just a huge issue for all of us at the moment. And as Councillor Riddington said, this was an issue in the in our local government conference, and the fact that their recommendation was at less than inflation. I'm just a bit curious that given that they've suggested that we can do this one-off variation, it's sort of an admission that the 0.7% was significantly low, and that we could expect that a lot of councils will go through this process. It also, to me, cost shifting, that IPART is expecting the local government to apply for these special or permanent variations. I mean, why did they select a lower cap in the first place? It's almost like placing the burden of making unpalatable decisions on local government, kind of like good cop, bad cop. The other thing I want to draw attention to is, I think it was last meeting where the mayoral minutes, we endorsed I think it was either the Commonwealth Local Government Association or the state one about that 1% of GDP, is that we were asking that the federal government increase that 1% of GDP so that councils could get more grants. So there is there's a clear state and federal issue there about funding. And And I think the bottom line is for councils is that 1 + 1, it does not equal 3, it equals 2. So if we have to find that extra one somewhere, that's it pretty much. Yeah, we cannot fund everything that is expected to us because 1 + 1 does not equal 3.
Thank you, Councillor Wyatt. Councillor Craigie, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Mr. Mitchell. Just regarding the just to add to the discussion, just on the assumption that he understands the budget probably better than most people in this room.
We still hope so.
So I think it'd be good just to help the community understand the numbers side of things. Acknowledging the deficit that we have, what would be the most ambitious date of resolving the deficit within the constraints of the rate peg?
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Craigie. So I guess in relation to this, just one point of clarification for a start, just in relation to Councillor Wyatt's comment around the 2.5%, we could only apply for 2%, given that that's the assumption that we included in last year's long-term financial plan. So under this special variation process for this year, councils were allowed to apply up to a maximum of 2.5% or what they included in their long-term financial plan. So in our case, that was 2%. In terms of the returning the general fund back to a balanced or modest surplus position, that's going to be a significant challenge. You can see, and we included a table in this report, let alone the detail that's in the long-term financial plan that was attached to agenda item 9.2 that's now been adopted. We've got substantial deficit in the general fund going out over the next 10 years. So it's sort of in the vicinity of sort of $3 to $4 million a year. Resolving that within the existing rate peg, based on the historical rate pegs, which have generally been relatively low, that would require us identifying either a substantial amount of savings, cutting services, or identifying our other own source revenue streams, which are fairly limited in our situation. We do have commercial businesses, but a number of those commercial businesses have got their own restrictions around them, and the ability to generate meaningful income from them is difficult as well. And in some cases, some of those commercial businesses, those funds that are generated from them, so the best example of that is our holiday parks, those funds that we generate can only be spent on Crown Reserve, so they can't be used to offset other expenses within the general fund anyway. So it's a really challenging position for us to resolve that. I can't give you a time. I don't know whether it's going to be 3 years, 10 years. What we have done and what was included in and articulated in quite some detail in the long-term financial plan at agenda item 9.2 was a revision of our financial sustainability strategy. So we had an adopted financial sustainability strategy in 2019. We've gone through and implemented a number of the recommendations or the actions or initiatives that were articulated in that strategy. They've resulted in a number of improvements. We've identified some savings from those, but they haven't been significant enough for us to actually resolve the deficit. We just have some fundamental challenges where our income that we generate doesn't cover the costs of providing the services as we currently do to the community. That said, we've identified another 15 or so sort of key actions that are going to be very much focused on that. The two probably ones to call out as being probably the ones that hopefully have the biggest impact would be one is around a service review. So what we've established a small team that's going to embark on doing a review of council services. And so part of that, the initial focus of that will be around the cost of providing those services and identifying whether there's any opportunities for cost savings. So that piece of work will commence, and that's one of the key items that was included in the operational plan, which has just been approved to go out on exhibition. The second one is to commence work on a special rate variation process. So that's not saying that we're saying we definitely would go for another special rate variation, but what we need to be aware of is that that is one solution to addressing the deficit, particularly when you've got a deficit of this size. So there's a whole lot of stuff that we would need to do before that, but that's a key action, is for us to actually start doing the planning and preparation for that, and obviously that would then require significant engagement and consultation with the councillors, and more critically then with the community, because obviously there's a capacity to pay and also feedback from the community around what they're prepared to accept in terms of cost versus service levels. So can't give you an exact date now. All we can say is that we're working our hardest to try and resolve it in a way that doesn't put any further burden on the ratepayers. But the reality, and if I'm being totally honest, we can probably execute on the majority of those items that are in that updated financial sustainability program. We wouldn't resolve the deficit, and so it will come down to a question as to the level of service or the rates and the price that people are prepared to pay for those services, and that's the piece of work that we'll be looking to do. We have done some work on that, but obviously with COVID and the impacts on our local community in relation to that, the natural disasters, that work we've sort of deferred in some extent in terms of taking that forward in a meaningful way. Now that we're poking our head out the other side of COVID, then that's something that we need to consider, because as the report here and as the report at 9.2 clearly says, is you cannot continue to run a business and in a deficit position. And what you may see, if you've read the attachments in any detail, you can see that deficit starts to hockey stick up. It starts to increase in the outer years because we need to borrow more money to fund our capital expenditure, and borrowing money comes at cost in terms of borrowing rates, and also with the underlying economic shift that we're seeing with interest rates increasing, you're getting the double whammy of having more debt at high rates. And so we've been lucky that we've been in a unusual situation of a very low interest rate environment, which means that we haven't had to worry about that. We were able to buy ourselves some time. That won't continue, and so we've got a pretty sizable challenge ahead of us. This is a very small additional contribution. The extra $260 or so thousand a year works out at on average less than $20 per ratepayer over the next year. But in our current financial situation, it's obviously a very strong recommendation from the staff that it be approved.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Do we have any questions or comments? Any further debate? Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of comments about the rate variation, about how it is needed by the council to maintain its services. With the cost of living rising, inflation is, I believe, going fairly wild at the moment, with especially in building products that council needs to purchase to deliver their different services. The roads being a very large, like I spoke about before, being a very large cost to the community. I can probably ask through Director Mitchell about the percentage of the roads in a cost to council versus other costs like wages. What sort of percentage are we?
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'll have to take that one. I'm known as Councillor Patterson.
The basic question is that, or comment is about the roads being such a large expense, and that us as ratepayers have to take that on. Looking at rate variations, there's a fairly large number of people who rent in our area, in our Macleay, so they don't directly pay rates, but they'll be paying rates as an extra expense in rental costs when it goes up. So it will affect a lot of people. The future may also bring many more challenges as inflation rates, like Director Mitchell said, that we're in a low interest rate time at the moment. But when the inflation rises and the government seeks to slow down the economy by rising interest rates, it's going to be another challenge. So I do believe we have hard times ahead, and so I think it's due diligence of council to request this rate rise at this time. So we look forward to everyone's support.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Do we have any other questions or comments? If not, I'll be putting the motion. Oh, sorry. Yes, my mistake. The move and reply. Councillor Bain, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank everyone for their comments, and also to look at what Councillor Riddington and Councillor Wyatt were saying, that the opportunity for accessing funds from other sources that will not be an impost on the ratepayers. I note, that we've had emergency funding through COVID, through bushfires, through floods. There's a lot of that emergency recovery funding, but we also need to look at a systemic way of moving forward. Again, in reference to the Mayor's minute from our previous election, that we can be really looking at getting some systemic increase in funding from the federal government, 1% of GDP, and also look and lobbying the state government to stop that cost shifting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. I'll now put the motion. Is there any dissent on the motion before you? If not, I declare it carried unanimously. We now move to item 9.4, a planning proposal for Crescent Head Road. It's on page 32 of the agenda. Detailed information about the planning proposal in the agenda. Do we have a councillor to move that, please? Councillor Freeman, please. And we need a seconder. Councillor Patterson. Councillor Freeman, do you wish to speak to it, please?
Yeah. I have a question for Councillor Wyatt.
Before you do, you're speaking to this motion.
Yep.
Okay, and then you can have questions. So you've got to speak in favour of the recommendation first, and then you can have questions. Thank you.
Awesome. From what I've read on the report, it seems that there's no actual kind of direct environmental impact by doing this subdivision, like dividing this block into, and it's only dividing it into 2 parcels of land. So I think it's a great opportunity to enact on the plan that we created for developing kind of rural areas. So I think that's great.
And you can now ask your question.
Carrying on to what I said, Councillor Wyatt, is there any was there any environmental impact that you saw would be caused from this subdivision? I do know that I think it's like Class A or Class 1 koala habitat, something like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. Councillor Wyatt. She does not have to answer such questions, but she may if she wishes to.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. That was going to be in my comments, so thank you. I do have a concern that about retention of koala fruit trees in general, and the Biodiversity Conservation Trust had identified about 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, that whole Crescent Head corridor was a primary focus for its private conservation initiatives, and they had a whole lot of meetings with residents right through that area. If you had a block of a certain size, that they're really interested in helping you maintain those koala fruit trees. And the recent New South Wales Koala Strategy, which was released in April, has identified Crescent Head within its top 10 priority areas for works. The ecological report in this plan says, in this proposal says that it doesn't contain high conservation value, but I note that it is in one of those priority areas. And I sort of feel that if we continue to look at such proposals in isolation, then vegetation, wildlife and landscapes will be lost. So if we look at it in isolation rather than bigger picture, And I was going to ask the question as well, is that I note that in later that we will be dealing with a matter where consent was given to subdivide, and then many years later they want to overturn some of those consent conditions and allow dwelling on that property. So I'm curious, rather, in order to provide my support or not, I'm curious as to what kind of guarantee can we provide that bit of vegetation on the second block will not be cleared. So, I mean, answer to your question, I think it's part of a network or a corridor of koala habitat and koala food trees. And I would just like to know that in the future is how can we guarantee? So today we can say it will be subdivided, here's the consent, you can't clear that land. But how can we make sure that that is not the case in 5 years' time? Because as I said, if we continue to look at these things in isolation, then it's pretty much death by 1,000 cuts, isn't it? So that's my question. So that's my answer, and that's my question probably.
Thank you. I'm about to ask for a response from Director Fish, please.
Yeah, thanks. Through the Mayor. So just I've initially addressed the comment around this being, I guess, a proposal that's in isolation. Council has a strategy for rural residential land use across the Shire, and it recognises various stages for which land maybe would be considered for rural residential land uses. This parcel of land is included in this strategy, so it's not something that's dealt in isolation. It is part of that plan that has been in place for a number of years. And obviously there has been quite a bit of activation of rural residential land between South Kempsey and Crescent Head on the back of that strategy, and obviously the suitability of the land use for aspects of that corridor. The vegetation, this is not a development application, it is a rezoning. So what this is seeking to do is amend the LEP to permit the reduced lot size at this location. So what you're in, I guess the report today seeks to do is to endorse staff to seek a gateway determination on the planning proposal. It will then be publicly exhibited and provided council is delegated to make the decision, it'll then be reported back to council for consideration of making the changes to the local environmental plan. So there's still quite a process to go before this is actually incorporated within the local environmental plan. And then the other phase is then there's a development application phase, which would then look at specific development in more detail. So the LEP amendment is seeking to amend the lot size, and there will be a DA down the track, obviously, when the proponent wishes to do so, for the subdivision and also the additional dwelling, I would expect. The vegetation that's on the site, that has been preserved through the location of the boundary in the, I guess, the where the subdivision would be proposed. You will see through some of the documents there has been some changes to that boundary, and that the changes to that were for the purposes of ensuring that that vegetation that is on the lot can remain, and also the siting of the dwelling also ensures that there's no requirement to clear that vegetation from a bushfire perspective. So the things that have been raised have certainly been considered and addressed. So certainly, and the recommendations of the report don't identify any concerns in that regard.
Thank you, Director Fish. A follow-up question, Councillor White? Oh, no, you've just answered the question. You can make a comment now.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify then my statement. My statement wasn't about in looking at, Oh, sorry. My statement wasn't about wasn't looking at this as in the rural lands in isolation. I'm talking about bigger picture, looking at little vegetation blocks for conservation in isolation. I understand that there is a rural strategy, and yeah, I understand that. I'm just making a comment that if we continue to say, well, this we can take this bit of vegetation, or we can take that is looking at those things in isolation. And my question was more about what guarantee can we have in the future that it won't be cleared? And I think it's more a matter of principle, because I live down there. There are properties being cleared.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Director Fish, please.
Through the Mayor, the rural residential land strategy would certainly take into account vegetation communities that exist. So it's there's quite a thorough process that goes into informing those strategies, and clearly it would be identifying land where vegetation may already be cleared or of limited impact. So that is very much fragmentation and that sort of thing would very much have been considered through that strategy. As I said, this is amending the lot size. There will be a subsequent development application, and there's been considerable discussion with the proponent around the preservation of the that vegetation on that land, and it certainly would be expectation through the DA that would be maintained once it gets to that stage. But we've still got to, as I said, we've got to go through the gateway and the LEP amendment before we even get near that.
Thank you, Director Fish. Do we have any further questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Patterson, please.
My question through to Director Fish. The use of this land would being that they're putting into to divide this already developed land, because I'm looking at the picture, it's already been cleared to an extent. Is this not a useful use of already developed land, and would there not be bushfire restrictions on the development as well anyway? And if people can't build on already developed land, where are they going to build?
Director Fish, please.
Yeah, through the Mayor. So there's been a bushfire assessment undertaken, which is one of the attachments to the report, and it obviously makes conclusions around the ability to, in particular, to have a dwelling on the site, or the additional dwelling on the site, within the Rural Fire Service Rural Boundary Clearing Code, there's not for that building envelope, there's not requirements for any additional clearing to be undertaken.
Thank you, Director Fish. Councillor Freeman.
Just one last question. Is this process that we're undertaking for this particular block, is this a normal process for subdividing, for dividing a piece of land, or is this process special, like including extra work for this site, and why would it include extra work if it is?
Thank you, Director Fish.
Yeah, so through the Mayor, so this particular site, because the lot size proposed once obviously it's split from 1 into 2 is below the minimum lot size in the local environmental plan, that requires the planning proposal to make that change to the local environmental plan for this location. So that's why we need to go through the planning proposal process. If the lot size was permissible, it would just be going straight to the development application. So it, obviously different sites, the great majority of locations that we have just go straight to a development application, but in this instance it needs to go through the planning proposal so the change can be made to the local environmental plan.
Thank you, Director Fish. Are there any other debate? Any other questions? If not, I'll ask the mover in reply if you wish to speak.
No, I'm right, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now put the motion as found on page 32, unamended. Any dissent from that motion? No dissent. I declare it carried unanimously. And we now move to 9.8, which is the, we've taken out of the items of moved by exception, the Code of Meeting Practice. It's on page 48, and the recommendations there before you. But I am going to ask for Manager of Governors to give us a report first before we move it.
Through Mr. Mayor, I'll just speak to that. Yes. After the issue was actually raised by Councillor Blaine in the briefing, it was actually a good point he raised. Given we've actually deferred this, what happens in the interim in relation to potentially remote access if and when needed. So Mr. Thorogood has actually put in the wording there at point 2, which will allow us to permit that remote attendance in accordance with the actual provisions of the model code through until we actually get the election outdone and we actually get something back to the new council on it. So it allows us to continue the way we are. It's not making any changes.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I'll give councillors a moment to read number 2 before I ask for someone to move the recommendation. This is the recommendation before us. It's not a motion yet until we have a mover. So please read point 2. We can now accept a mover, but if you have questions about that, you can do that during the debate. So is there a mover of the recommendation that's before you on the screen? Councillor Bain. Seconder, please. Councillor Riddington. Councillor Bain, do you wish to speak to the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've been under discussion of the Code of Meeting Practice, and I understand that we had planned on workshopping this further, but with the imminent by-election coming up for all of us, I can understand the importance of deferring this, and I thank the council staff for confirming that that remote attendance will still be an available option, particularly with the tyranny of distance. I find it difficult to get to some of those meetings without, during the week, and I understand it. It's I do commit to face-to-face with council meetings, but thank you for that work, and I commend this to fellow councillors.
Right, is there any debate? Anyone wish to ask a question? This is your time. Councillor Wyatt, please.
Just a clarification question. Is this essentially just being moved because of a timing issue and we've got to, is it?
Yes.
Councillor General Manager has an answer and it's very short. Yes. Thank you. Any further questions or debate, please? If not, I'll put the motion. Is there any dissent from the motion that's on the screen in front of you? We've got 2 points. There's no dissent. I declare it carried unanimously. And we now move to (10.1). I'm to move to 10.1 to notice of motion and support on the Local Government New South Wales Special Conference. The recommendation is before you that Council receive and note the report. I put it up, but as Chair, I'd like someone else to move the motion, please. Councillor Riddington. Seconder, please. Councillor Wyatt. Councillor Riddington, would you like to speak on the report and the annual conference? Please do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I personally really enjoyed the conference, and if we're all back in this same spot for next year, I'd highly recommend it. It was very, very good networking. To attend the breakout sessions, and we all did a report on each other's breakout sessions, was really meaningful. And I think to be able to talk to other councils and councillors and mayors around the whole of New South Wales and feel that they have exactly the same problems that we have was a really good thing to do. It made us feel included and not on our own, and I would highly recommend it for next year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Riddington. Anyone else who attended or would like to ask a question? I'll ask you to contribute. Councillor Bain, please.
I'd just like to note that there's there's a conflict within the report under workshops. It identifies myself as having attended verbal judo, but my report is about the prevention of domestic violence. I just want to clarify that can we amend that report that I did attend the prevention of domestic violence workshop, and I would like to support that it was a really good learning experience to attend the conference, but also a good opportunity to be participatory in democracy and understanding what those issues that face all the local government areas are. The business day was extremely full and busy. There was a lot of reading and a lot of preparation, but it was worthwhile to be involved, and I would highly recommend, and I'd like to also thank the council for giving me the opportunity to be a voting delegate at that conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. And Councillor Bain, I'd like to apologise for that error. You did go to the domestic violence one, and I did write in the wrong thing when I was putting this report together. But thank you for that report, and I don't know if it can be amended in the agenda, but it's public now. Thank you. Councillor Patterson, please.
Just like to ask a question based on the fact that it was one of the most pressing issues considered was the request urgent review of the IPART's 0.7 baseline rate peg approved. Through to Director Mitchell, could I have your comment based on why you think it would have been a low 0.7? Is it? This is just for information, for my own information, I suppose, as well. Is it based on the fact that most councils are fairly well, are more financially better off than us, like more ratepayers, smaller area, less roads, etc.? Is that what you think that government would base that such a low baseline rate on?
Councillor Patterson, I had to rule that question's not in order technically, but it should have been asked earlier when we were considering the financial part. This is just a report of what was said at the committee at the annual conference, and therefore in the report it actually tells you that the government is looking at how that IPART decision was made and is requesting a review. So that's happening, and that's part of that report. So it's going to be fixed.
Yeah, as I didn't attend the conference,
yes,
and go, I just was asking that. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Patterson. Anyone else have a comment or a question? Add to the debate. Councillor Wyatt, please.
Too is I agree with both the colleagues here. It was it was privileged to go. Actually, it was really good to be there. I did feel, I think this was your comment, it was a bit like one of these meetings on steroids. It was pretty full on. Yeah, I would have, if we are able to provide feedback back to the local government association, it would have been nice if they had just allowed the new councillors just slow it down a bit. There was a comment there that something like 50% of people there were new councillors, so it would have been nice to have slowed it down a bit. I did do my preparation, but it was a bit like one of these meetings on steroids, very full on, but very informative. The workout sessions were fantastic, and the speaking groups were fantastic, and the networking was fantastic, and I thank council and the community for allowing us paying to go.
Thank you, Councillor Wyatt. I endorse your comments and the other comments from the attendees. It was very worthwhile, and I found it very instructive, especially on the issue of rural health, which was really, really interesting. And it's an issue that really pertains to our area. Councillor Campbell, did you have any comment on what you remember about the rural health?
I think it was pretty much covered in this workshop report. There was one thing, though, that we probably need to follow up on, that there is, and I haven't got the actual wording with me, but I will follow it up with you later. I had it in my notes that there is a report that we can request or we should be following up on, and I don't think we are doing it in this LGA, but I'll come back to you on that.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. We certainly are not in the realm of local government, but we certainly can advocate for local community health improvements. And you would all be aware that we have a major issue with provision of health services and a number of GPs and the services of the hospital and so forth. There's a lot of issues. So yes, we should follow up and advocate for improvement for our local Kempsey community. Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Any other questions or comments? No, I will put the recommendation is that the council receive and note the report, and the mover in reply, if you wish. Okay, well, I'll put the motion. Any dissent from that the council receive and note the report? Thank you. It's carried unanimously. So the meeting now moves into confidential. I'll ask the public gallery to be emptied, please. Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Campbell, you're moving that we go into confidential.
Yes, I move that.
Thank you. And a seconder, please. Councillor Freeman.
The motions that were taken within closed session of council in relation to item 11.1 legal matters, council resolved the council receive and note the report. In relation to item 11.2, mayoral minute, general manager's interim performance review, council resolved that council receives and notes the confidential report, and 2, conducts a councillors' workshop to assist with input into the 2022-2023 general manager's performance agreement prior to any by-election. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thorogood. I'll now call the meeting to a close. Declare closed at 11:05. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance.